Hi, I'm Eric Barrera,
And I'm Brendan Hardy.
and this is A Link to the Past, our analysis of William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. So, if any of you have ever read this story, or attempted to read this story, it's a very difficult book to access for the inexperienced reader, so that's why we're here today. The story depicts a family in the South, around the early 1900s, that are struggling to deal with the evolution of Southern ideals following the Civil War and the Reconstruction era in American society. The story focuses largely on the children in the family, and today we're going to be focusing on four major characters. Their names are Quentin, Caddy, Benji, and Jason Compson. So this family has lived in the South, and they own a large plot of land, but after the abolition of slavery, the family was forced to sell off a large portion of their land, and as a result, the family's ideals and internal structure has consequently changed, and that change is reflected largely in the lives of the children. And so through the viewpoints of these children, we're going to analyze how time and the impact of the past has shaped their futures and the future of the families.
So we're just going to dive right in here. We were introduced to the characters in multiple lenses of time. The first viewpoint we experienced was through the eyes of Benji, who had a very disjointed narrative because of his lack of perspective of time. One of the first major scenes that we encountered was the death of their grandmother. Because of her death, it really symbolized the old ideals and the Reformed South dying, which was a major motif in the book. Each of the children had a different reaction to the death of their grandmother, and that was really exposed through their perspective on time and reality. Two of the biggest differences were those of the children Jason and Caddy. They had very contradicting perspectives on time. As you can see here with the red and blue highlighters, this was very important quotes to reflect upon their perspectives of time. Jason hushed for when he said it was a funeral. Well, it's not, Caddy said, it's a party. This expressed Jason's views that the death of the grandmother was more of a saddening time, while Caddy expressed it as more of being a party and a joyous time. And this is reflecting upon Jason's views of the Old South and Caddy's views on progression. This mere dialogue in the beginning of the book turns into one of the major themes in the book, and how the perspectives on the death of the grandmother reflects in their views of the South.
Alright, so we're just going to jump back in time a little bit. So this occurred chronologically before the death of the grandmother, but we felt it would be easier to explain afterward. So pay no attention to this little blue guy over here for right now. At the beginning of the page, you can see, as we've highlighted in red here, Quentin is seriously concerned with authority and how he may be punished as a child. This comes up frequently throughout the exposition of the novel. Quentin's fear for authority really defines his mentality. He's very concerned with submitting to Southern authority, and that fear here really demonstrates that theme. So as we go through, Benji here claims he begins to cry. These are subtle undertones that many readers don't pick up in the beginning of the novel, but this really testifies to the aspect of chaos that the author is trying to create here. Benji has a very disjointed aspect of time, or perception of time rather, and so when he begins to cry with all these memories flooding through his head, it shows how when time is disjointed, it can become a very chaotic experience. Okay, so now we get to the portion of this page that deals with Caddy. So here we can see she decides to go into the water and play in the water, despite Quentin's fear that they'll get punished for it for being wet. She goes in the water, and she gets wet, and she gets muddy, and that symbolism is supposed to relate to her ideals about time and about progression. It's really subtle undertones for the average reader to pick up, but it's very important when we look to later portions of the novel to understand that Caddy does not possess the same perception of time as Quentin. She sees time as a relative thing, and that progression is a very positive mentality that she decides to take up. So clearly Quentin and Caddy are already very contradicting characters, even at this early stage in the novel. And as we go through, we'll be able to see her levels of progression develop even more.
So this beginning excerpt displays Quentin's fascination and cognitive awareness of time. This first quote right here exposes Quentin's desire to control time and sheds his knowledge of the Southern traditions. And although Quentin breaks or appears to break his watch, the watch still working shows his inability to oppose the Southern traditions that were placed upon him. And so in this shop, a lot of the clocks don't seem to work, and that is due to the concept of contradicting viewpoints of the time that Faulkner is trying to establish. This is really one of the major references to the modernist ideas of Faulkner, but we'll get to that a little later. Right here it said, "Father said clocks slay time. He said time is dead." And that is really given to inform the reader that the Southern ideals are still alive, and these are the beliefs that Quentin lives by that were passed on from his father. Quentin is mostly in a Harvard environment, which is generally pretty progressive, and so when he's back home, he sees a lot of these old Southern traditions that are coming back, and that makes it even more difficult for Quentin to accept progression because of his background and what he's been through in college. And ultimately, because of his experiences, having trouble accepting progression and continuing to go back to his old Southern traditions, it creates an internal conflict in Quentin and causes his eventual suicide.
Alright, so the Caddy versus Quentin conflict, as we talked about before, is a prominent conflict in the story. The two characters really juxtapose each other and highlight specific qualities that each character is designed to epitomize. So here we have a conflict between Quentin and his father. His father is attempting to defend Caddy's promiscuity, claiming that virginity isn't a real important concept, and Quentin just can't seem to accept this idea. He, as we talked about before, has a commitment to the old Southern ideals, and this commitment to the old Southern ideals is expressed through his views on virginity. So really, Quentin has a very difficult time accepting this feeling of progression. And so as we move forward through the page, you see here this inclusion of the imagery with the mayflies skimming in and out of the shadow of the bridge. Things like this in the story often seem like little pieces of imagery that are insignificant, but Faulkner puts those in for a reason. The mayflies really skimming out of the surf, in and out of the shadow, symbolize Quentin and his conflict between the progression at Harvard and the shadow of his life that is the Old South. He's unable to make contact with the pure water that we talked about before with Caddy going into the water. He's just above the surface. So this quote right here really exemplifies well Quentin's role in the novel. Quentin's commitment to the Southern ideals really relates back to Faulkner's views on modernism. The idea that old traditions don't matter anymore, that traditions aren't the way they used to be, that we shouldn't value traditions. Those are really main focal points of the ideas of modernism. And Faulkner really brings that to light with the contradiction between Quentin and Caddy. And so this aspect of time and this reoccurring motif throughout the story really all relates back to Faulkner's ideas of modernism. And if you're able to understand modernism, I know it's a very difficult subject, but if you're able to understand that, it makes it a lot easier to understand this novel.